Hello everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 212. On Wednesday of this week, May 27th, Netflix is going to release its Jeffrey Epstein documentary based on the James Patterson book, Filthy Rich. Now, those of us who have been following this case, there's not much in the documentary that we're going to learn that we do not know already. But what it's going to do is it's going to introduce the material to a group of people which I have started calling the Unsullied. Now, the Unsullied are people who do not know the Jeffrey Epstein case and do not know what occurred. They would be people that had just saw it in the news or whatever and thought, oh yeah, well, another rich pedophile, moving on. But in reality, it's so much more. And if America went batshit crazy over the Tiger King story, can you imagine what America is going to do when they sink their eyes and their teeth into this Jeffrey Epstein story and they hear some of the accounts from the survivors, etc., etc.? There's going to be a swell of interest in the case, and there's going to be a lot of new people, the Unsullied, who are searching for information. And for all of you who are out there who have been, following this case for quite some time, obviously, who are invested, who have been following my podcast from the beginning, try and have a little bit of patience with people that are like asking you questions, or if they ask a question that you might deem stupid, just remember that they might not be as locked into the case as we are. And at the end of the day, we want to inform as many people as possible about what occurred and about what is going on within this case. So I don't think being condescending is the right route to go. And I think that we should be there to try and help people out if they have questions, right? Or if they're, talking about the case on Twitter or social media or something, and they get something wrong, or they don't have all of the pieces or whatever. I think it would be a good idea, instead of be condescending, for us to, try and guide them in the right direction. And obviously, all we can do is provide the evidence and the materials and the articles for them to read. You can't ever force anybody into anything, but there's going to be a lot of people that are stumbling around with a case like this, not knowing even where to start, right? And they're going to be looking for guidance. And who is better suited for that task than all of you out there that listen to these podcasts like mine and the Prince and the Pervert podcast, et cetera, because look, I'm telling you right now, you're going to see it. There's going to be a huge uptick in interest, and there's going to be a bunch of Unsullied bumbling their way through the case, trying to figure out what's what. We see it all the time with stuff like this. We saw it with Making a Murderer, Tiger King, obviously, and now with the Jeffrey Epstein case, with all of the twists and turns and the roller coaster ride that this case is, and you add the flair of government corruption, etc., and the American people are going to go batshit insane when they watch this documentary. So, leading up to that, if there are some articles that are out about the documentary, I'll add them to the catalog like we're going to do tonight. Tonight's article is from the San Francisco Chronicle, and the headline is, "Watching a documentary about Jeffrey Epstein is like watching a monster movie." And the headline alone is why I chose this article, because obviously there are a bunch of articles talking about the documentary. We've went over that already, though. We've covered it, we've previewed it, and I don't think there's any more to gain from that. But anytime I see a headline like this, I'm guessing the author is going to eviscerate Epstein in the article, and you know what? Every now and then, I like to just pile on. So let's jump into this article. Like I said, it's from the San Francisco Chronicle. The author is Mick LaSalle. That Jeffrey Epstein was a horrible person is hardly breaking news. The news in Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, a 4-part Netflix documentary, is just how horrible he was and in how many ways. That's a perfect opening paragraph. So as all of you know who listen to the podcast or been listening to the podcast, I don't read these articles before I read them on air with you. So all of the new listeners out there, that's how we do the daily drop and the morning updates. I don't read the article prior to reading it on air with you. That way you have my actual reaction and I'm not, penning something out or rehearsing how I'll react. I want it to be as visceral as possible. So again, you'll hear me talk about that every now and again about how or you'll hear me talking about how I'm disgusted by an article or I'm shocked by an article, and that's just because I have not read it yet. Previously, I haven't done any kind of, prior looking into it or anything like that, so that my reaction is visceral. He was a liar and a crook. Though he looked smooth, he was thuggish in manner. He was a fraud and a poser. And he was not only a sex criminal, but a versatile sex criminal. He was even something like a cult leader in terms of his ability to find, manipulate, and dominate vulnerable girls and women. And this plays into the parallels that I've pointed out between him and Keith Raniere from NXIVM and how they had their inner circle completely on lock, right? There was nothing that these men couldn't ask of these girls. They would do it. The core four that Jeffrey Epstein was surrounded by, there was nothing he couldn't ask them that they would not do. And what happens is that atmosphere is so pervasive within his orbit that other girls get caught up into it and they think that this is just the norm, that this is how it is. And we all know that it's not. We know that it's disgusting and we know that it's gross. But when you're caught up in the atmosphere and everybody around you is acting a certain way and conducting themselves a certain way, you think that that's the way that part of society conducts itself. And you just, get in where you fit in. And Epstein knew how that worked, and he knew how to manipulate these girls into believing that what they were doing was okay. The tone of Filthy Rich is measured. Its assertions are documented. But in essence, this is a monster movie where you wait for somebody to kill the monster, except here the climax is not so satisfying. Here, the monster dies off stage. He allegedly hangs himself in prison, though a number of experts dispute the suicide conclusion. So far so good with this article, right? I totally agree with what this guy's talking about, and he's not wrong. These assertions are documented. The things that we talk about here on this podcast are all documented, and everything we talk about here is out of the actual news cycle. We don't run around half-cocked on this podcast. We don't make things up on this podcast. And we certainly do not fall for fake news and propaganda if we can help it on this podcast. I'll leave that to other folks. Here, we cover what is going on in the news. Every name that we talk about on this podcast has been mentioned in articles. Every single person that we discuss has either been credibly accused as being part of the trafficking ring or has been named an enabler by their behavior. There's no fishing expeditions going on this podcast, that's for sure. And I'm guessing in this documentary, that's the same thing is going on here. I would think that Netflix is not playing around here and they're not going to run something like this if they don't have the receipts to prove what they're talking about. So I'm very interested to see the approach and I'm very interested to see the delivery. One big element in support of the suicide hypothesis is that 2 days before his death, Epstein transferred all his assets offshore in order to make it harder for his survivors to get at his money. Assuming he knew he was going to kill himself, that would be an action consistent with his pattern. Spiteful, remorseless, and yes, just use the word, evil. I agree to a certain extent about the will and Jeffrey Epstein transferring his assets offshore to the Virgin Islands, etc., and then dying 2 days later. It definitely, for sure, looks a little weird, right? And if all of the things that happened in the jail did not happen, we're talking about the guards falling asleep. We're talking about him being in a jail cell with Tartaglione. We're talking about the cameras not working. We're talking about the body being moved before there was evidence taken after the fact. We're talking about how Baden has come out and said that he believes it's homicide, etc., 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 etc. So if we didn't have all of these other quote-unquote coincidences, I'd be much more inclined to believe that he killed himself and he just didn't want to face the music. But when you know the story the way we do, and you've put all the pieces together and you look at the big picture, there could be numerous scenarios to why he moved his assets to where he did. Was he told to do so? Did his handler tell him to do so? We don't know any of these things, right? This is all speculation. We have no idea what occurred. But what I will tell you is this. There are way too many coincidences that occurred around his death for me to ever swallow down the narrative the way they're serving it. It must be admitted that part of the success of the documentary is that Epstein makes such a satisfying villain. There's no ambiguity here. There's no feeling sorry for him. No other side to the story. No other side to the character. It's a study in a distinct case of wickedness. Someone with no conscience and no morals who was armed with an uncanny ability to manipulate people. And it was a lot more than that, right? Again, that's just scratching the surface of what Jeffrey is. He was all of those things. There's no doubt, right? No doubt about it. But he was a lot more. He was a very, very, very calculating man. He was always operating 2 or 3 steps ahead of the people he was associating with. And he was a lot more than just a so-called financier, okay? Obviously a pedophile. But I'm talking about his so-called professional life. How much more evidence does there need to be that Jeffrey Epstein was connected to intelligence in one way or the other? Even if you don't go, you won't go far, all the way and say, all right, well, Jeffrey Epstein was working as an asset involved in a blackmail operation that included intelligence agencies, foreign and domestic. Even if you don't buy that, there is no way that you can even try and convince me that you believe that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't juiced within the government, right? Now, obviously, I'm talking about people who don't know the case, people who come into this case and think it seems so fantastical that this man was actually a spy and it was being run as a black op by our intelligence agencies with the help of foreign intelligence agencies. It seems like the plot of a book, right? Or some bad movie on TV. But it's reality. That's exactly what was going on as far as the evidence has pointed us so far. That is the only conclusion that we can come to logically following this case at this point. There is no way that Jeffrey Epstein was just some rich guy like Harvey Weinstein, like some people would like us to believe. If that was the case, then why didn't Jeffrey Epstein get the same exact sort of sentence that Harvey Weinstein got, or Cosby got, or any of these other rich people got? Because there were many more layers to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. It was not just about the trafficking ring. It was not just about the abuse. Jeffrey Epstein was very, very insulated, very protected, and that protection came from on high. He cheated and scammed his way to a fortune. The documentary supplies the details and seemed to devote the rest of his life to satisfying his destructive sexual perversity. Along the way, he makes sure to work his way into friendships with people in power so as to insulate himself from prosecution. And again, I think that's taking the straight route to where we're going. There's a lot more going on there. It wasn't just friendships, and he didn't work hard and work his way into those friendships. A lot of those friendships were opened up to him on the back of the other enablers, the Dubins, the Wexners, the Maxwells, etc., etc. So Jeffrey Epstein was introduced to these people via his enablers, right? His conduits into so-called polite society. And once there, well, he tempted these people with what he had to offer, with what he had going on. And like I said, a lot of these scientists, these professors, these rich guys, they're dorky their whole lives, right? They're not the kind of guys that are going out and picking up girls on a regular basis. So they go to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Jeffrey Epstein has all of these young, attractive ladies. These guys go in thinking that, hey, look, these girls are over 18. Nobody would have all these underage girls here. What are you, crazy? And before you know it, they're getting blackmailed. It's a pretty easy scenario to see unfold, right? It's an age-old trick. This has been going on since there's been kingdoms, and the kingdoms have had intelligence agencies or their version of. Men's sexual proclivities are one of the most targeted things when it comes to these sort of operations. Filthy Rich includes interviews with many of his survivors, now women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. His method was to find underage girls from tortured backgrounds and have them come to his house in Florida. Not just Florida, all of his houses. Again, I don't know about New Mexico. I talked about this earlier. I don't have any proof one way or the other in New Mexico or in the Virgin Islands. I don't have any tangible proof. I have circumstantial evidence and I have things that people have told to me, but I can't make the connection directly. But if we're going on the way Jeffrey Epstein has conducted himself elsewhere, we would have to be really silly to think that he wasn't doing the same thing in New Mexico and the Virgin Islands. He would promise them things and then ask them to give him a massage, for which they'd have to take off all of their clothes. Usually they say yes. Over time, he created a kind of pyramid scheme where girls would bring in other girls and be rewarded with a $200 finder's fee. And even though I know all of this stuff, even though we're very familiar with all of this information, it is still distressing and disgusting when I read it. A $200 is the price that he put on the innocence of these young girls. $200 is the price that he put on basically their whole entire lives, all of their hopes and all of their dreams. They were worth $200 to this man. He also victimized young women in their early 20s. Several women talk about being raped by Epstein and then trafficked to his wealthy friends. One moment leaps out in particular. One of his accusers, Sarah Ransom, says that while she was being assaulted, she soon realized that the more upset and anguished she became, the happier Epstein got. I think about that, folks. Is that not the sign of a complete and utter psychopath? A sociopath? A narcissist? You name it? The more she was frightened, the more he got excited. The very thought makes me want to put my fist through Jeffrey Epstein's dead face. I have never been more disgusted by a so-called human being in my whole entire life, folks. I mean, that's not hyperbole. That's not me kidding around. That's not me just firing shit off here on the podcast. I am truly that disgusted by the behavior of this man and by the fact that he was able to conduct himself in such a manner for so long. It makes my blood boil. Filthy Rich deals with the long process of bringing Epstein to some form of justice. It tells how he was able to subvert and derail investigations and devotes considerable time to the plea deal his lawyers were able to negotiate with Florida federal prosecutor Alexander Acosta, who later became Secretary of Labor in the Trump administration. Look, Acosta knew the deal. Acosta told the Trump transition team that he was told hands off because Epstein belonged to intelligence. And another thing that I don't think we talk about enough on this podcast, I know I haven't talked about it nowhere nearly enough. I won't speak for anyone else, so I'll just talk about here. You know, we need to talk more about Alberto Gonzales, who was the Attorney General at the time, and the Bush administration's role within this whole entire Jeffrey Epstein fiasco. I think that gets forgotten because we have newer players to go after, but there's certainly an angle there with the Bush administration, and there were certainly members of the Bush administration who were enabling and helping Jeffrey Epstein conduct his crazy ring here, right? His crimes. They were helping him conduct his crimes. And it's just beyond the pale, folks. Just beyond the pale. The whole entire Bush administration, how they've walked free from all of not only the war crimes, but the other crimes that they committed against the American people is beyond me. And I think it's going to go down as one of the biggest travesties in the history of the world. Never mind to mention the fact that Rumsfeld and his buddies somehow misplaced, and I'm quoting, using air quotes right now when I say that, misplaced $2.2 trillion. How do you misplace $2.2 trillion? So again, the Bush administration needs a hard look when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, in my opinion, and certainly Alberto Gonzalez deserves a hard look. Several women talk on camera about having sex at Epstein's urging with famous people in his social circle, including Epstein's lawyer Alan Dershowitz and Prince Andrew of Great Britain. Both men deny these allegations. Interestingly, though people say on camera that they saw Bill Clinton visiting Epstein at his estate, no one claims that Clinton had anything to do with women. Clinton is portrayed as just one more of the wealthy, powerful people that Epstein courted. That's, look, I agree. There's zero evidence that Bill Clinton was abusing any girls within Jeffrey Epstein's atmosphere. I have not seen that evidence yet, and if it's out there, I would love to see it. Now, does that mean I don't think that Bill Clinton's a reprehensible, disgusting son of a bitch? No, because I certainly do. But I think Clinton's role in all of this has always been more of an enabler, has always been more of a conduit. And I think that Jeffrey Epstein gave Bill Clinton a lot more money than a lot of people understand. One of Bill Clinton's lawyers, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers, I believe, said that Jeffrey Epstein gave Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton $6.5 million to start the Clinton Global Initiative as some seed money. And, the ties are deep, right? The ties are deep with all of these people who have walked in this rarefied air that these leaders have walked, have all come in contact with Epstein, it seems. But Bill Clinton was used as an enabler, right? He was one of those guys that Epstein, they were very, very close, folks, and Epstein was a bundler for him, like Doug Band or one of these other guys, right? He was one of these guys, a money guy. And he was firing off a lot of money to Bill Clinton. And Epstein was so comfortable with his relationship with Clinton that he thought it would be a good idea to have Bill Clinton in a blue dress painted on his wall. Now, that just doesn't occur because you're bored one day, right? Him and Clinton must have been pretty close. Now, again, that doesn't mean Clinton was involved in the trafficking angle of this. For me, I've always seen Clinton as just a gigantic enabler when it comes to this specific situation. And of course, a liar about a lot of things, right? He's lied about going to Zorro Ranch, etc., etc. But as far as Bill Clinton being portrayed by people as somebody who was partaking in the abuse of young girls on Jeffrey Epstein's island, the evidence isn't there. Right? The evidence is not there for us to make that leap. Certainly not here on this podcast, and I certainly won't be making that leap here. I'm not here to, throw out a bunch of disinformation or chase down anything that's going to feed my confirmation bias. I'm here to get to the bottom of things, right? We're here to read these articles and get to the bottom of things. And the fact of the matter is, Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein were very, very close for a very, very long time. And not only were they close as far as, professionally, but privately as well. So it is certainly valid to bring up Bill Clinton in this documentary, and it's certainly valid to explore his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. But I think it's also very important to make sure that we also state that he is not accused of assaulting anybody or being involved in the trafficking. Now, that doesn't make his enabling of Jeffrey Epstein any better, by the way. The movie leaves no doubt as to the damage that Epstein caused. One woman says, "Before Epstein, I was someone else. The way I saw myself was like a flower opening up. Someone took that flower, plucked it from its roots, stepped on it, and stomped on it." And that sums it up right there, better than I could ever sum it up, to be honest with you. That's coming from one of the gals in the documentary, and that's basically how it must feel, right? You're this young girl, you have your whole life ahead of you, a whole life, promising life ahead of you. The world is your oyster. and you come in contact with this man, and everything from that moment on is completely different than what you had planned as a little girl. And the fact that that occurred for so long with so many different girls, and so many little girls' lives were shattered and ruined, and this man was able to continue to conduct himself the way he did because we have an inept government that is more worried about playing politics and playing tribes than they are about going after child trafficking pedophiles, is the most disgusting, abhorrent thing I think I've ever lived through. I get more embarrassed by the Justice Department and my own government on a daily basis here in America. And that's sad, right? It's really sad because, you grew up in America and you're fed a whole bunch of bull about the justice system and how, it's equal justice for everyone under the law, et cetera, et cetera. And then as you get a little older and you start to pay attention, you realize there's no more truth in that than there is in Santa Claus. And at that point, when I figured that out, I really started to get agitated by the criminal conduct that I saw on a regular basis from our so-called authorities. It's not okay for the government to break the law in pursuit of arresting somebody else, okay? And I don't care who they're going after. I don't care if you hate Trump more than you hate anybody. If they go after people illegally, the FBI, the intelligence agencies, they must be held to account. And the same goes the other way. If the FBI or the Justice Department is going after their political rivals, folks, we got a major problem here. And nobody should ever be cheering that on. And I don't care who the target is, okay? That is so dangerous for our society. And it goes to show you how brazen these people are. It builds the profile for you, right? Just like the same way when we read articles about Prince Andrew, it builds you a profile of the FBI and the intelligence agencies, and it shows you that they are literally, without any oversight and able to do whatever it is that they like. And you think that we were ever going to get a whiff of Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation if it wasn't for the survivors coming forward and being so brave? What do you think, the legacy media was going to get on this story? No, they're too busy trying to make you hate your neighbor, folks. They're way too busy doing that for them to jump on this story and really go hard in the paint after these corrupt bastards that we have populating our over-bloated bureaucracies. And I've had a belly full. I've had my belly full of it. I'm done. I'm tired of these agencies, and I'm tired of their overreach. I'm tired of them breaking the law in pursuit of the law. And then saying, well, the means justifies the end. And that's basically how they live and the way they think. And personally, I'm tired of it. And we see the damage that it has caused, not only in this case, but around the world. And this case was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Enough is enough, and these people can no longer be allowed to run around unchecked, without any oversight, and continue to be involved in operations such as Jeffrey Epstein's. We have to stand up and say enough is enough, folks, because it's going to keep happening. If we let this story just die, if these survivors aren't granted the justice that they deserve, then this is just going to happen again. Because you know how it works. When people see that there's no repercussions for something, well, they think they can get away with it too. So this needs to be the most vicious and cruel set of RICO charges in the history of the world, in my opinion. And anything less than that is a failure at this point on the part of the federal government and those who say that they're pursuing justice. Because, folks, it is RICO or bust. If you'd like to contact me, you could do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. In the description box, you'll be able to find all the other stuff and a link to the story. All right, everybody, I'll talk to you later on. I hope you all had a fantastic evening.